Hey, what up? This video is inspired in the moment by one of my fellow YouTube vegans, digital vegan activists, whatever you want to say, named Brianna Jackfruitson. Brianna put up a video reflecting on her own largely negative experiences with the educational system, how as a younger person she had a lot of positive motivation and was a bit of a perfectionist, and why she decided not to go to university. Maybe I'm even painting it in too bleak a color palette with that very brief description, because it's not a downbeat video. If anything, she's very upbeat and positive about her life right now. And I'm so happy for Brianna. She seems to have really turned her life around in some profound way. And she's now talking openly about her mental illness in the past tense, which is great. I'm very happy for her. And I think anyone who's watched her videos on and off over the years, because I'm not a regular viewer of her channel, can see a tremendous contrast in her character, in the way she construes her sentences, in the way one thought leads to another. It really seems like she's had a tremendously positive personal transformation. And that's what she says about herself too. So I'm happy for her that she's turned her life around. And mental illness itself is quite mysterious. It's difficult to talk about with any precision. But in a lot of ways, the deeper mystery is what we mean by mental health, is what we mean by sanity, is what we, in this context, she's apparently recovered from serious mental illness. And that's even, more difficult to describe. So shout out to Brianna. I'm really happy for her. And some people in the past thought that Brianna and I hate each other. We just don't know each other. We're just complete strangers. There's no contact between us. But anyway, as with all these people, I really hope that in future, now that she's overcome some of those issues, she can make more and more of a positive contribution to this movement that we call veganism. Hey. I hope. But all of us have got to contribute in our own ways. And I've talked about that a lot in earlier videos. Not everyone is going to have the same message to contribute, and not everyone is going to employ the same modes of activism. So Brianna, whatever you're doing next, I really do wish you the best, and I'm happy for you with the progress you've made. With all that having been said, topic of her video was university. And I wanted to make a reply video. Her video was basically titled Why She Did Drop Out of University. So I wanted to make a video talking about why I did not drop out of university. I have been to university, I was going to say I've been to university twice. Actually, a huge part of my life has been spent in universities, and I guess I could count at least 3 times when I was living on a university campus and enrolled in university. My first diploma was from the University of Toronto, and I went back and got a second diploma from the University of Victoria, which I have not collected yet. Technically, I'm currently in China studying pursuant to and as part of that diploma, and then when I go back to UVic, I can pretty much pick up that diploma as soon as I go back to Canada. That's simplifying somewhat, but let's leave the details aside. On both occasions, the quality of education I received from within the Canadian system was so bad, was so terrible, that I didn't just consider dropping out. I actively wanted to drop out. I was actively pursuing and investigating options, alternatives to staying at university, so that I could drop out, and I didn't find any. Now, different people react to this in different ways. It's normally especially difficult for me to talk to people about my university experience if, for example, they come from Germany, if they come from France, if they come from another Western country, where they presume that our education system in Canada is the same as their own, or where they presume that what they've seen in American movies is true of the Canadian education system, or even that it's true of the American education system. Because let's face it, Hollywood does not give you the most, accurate portrayal of how any education system works. My experience at University of Toronto was absolutely abysmal. University of Toronto is such a big university that, of course, what I have to say isn't true of all departments. It wouldn't be true of, for example, medical sciences, which I had no contact with. It wouldn't be true of computer programming. Totally different department, might as well be a totally different university. But I did have experience with many different departments at that university, and I now have experience with many different universities over many years. So I know that some of my negative experiences there really do reflect endemic problems with the system, if that's how you want to talk about it. And other problems, of course, just reflect particular people's personalities. But a university is not an anarchist utopia. It's very much a hierarchical, top-down organization Some people give commands, other people follow them. Some people make decisions, other people live with the consequence of those decisions. So in as much as there were particular bad apples within the system, that's also a feature that everyone has to deal with, whether you're in America or England or any similar Western English language tradition of how a university works. One person can destroy a department for decades, can destroy the reputation of the whole university for several years or what have you. So it's a top-down system. And the other peculiar thing about my experience was that I could see it from the professor's perspective, because even when I was at the University of Toronto, even when I was a young student, I was a normal, kid, a great many of the professors who talked to me were, if anything, somewhat desperate to become friends with me, to divulge to me what the problems were that they experienced in running the university from their own perspective. They were, if anything, trying to make me a sympathetic ally of theirs and to explain what the problems were they were encountering. So in as much as I might have had a perspective that a given course was a disaster or a given department or program was a disaster, very often the professors themselves were eager to explain to me, look, this course is bad for this reason. Here's the guy who made the decision. Here was the planning that went into it. Here were the factors we considered. They were very often wanting to give me the backstory for what was wrong with it. And now when I returned to University of Victoria, that was even more true because I was a more mature student, and but that already happened back at University of Toronto back in 1998. And when I was at University of Victoria, even more so, there were professors who were really eager to disclose to me what the systematic problems were, what they were struggling with in trying to do a decent job in delivering an education to people, including myself. With all that having been said, sympathy only goes so far. When you're in a hierarchical relationship like that, the bottom line is they're responsible for their decisions, they're responsible for the consequences of their decisions, and people like me really suffer because of the consequences of their decisions. And in both universities, as I've already mentioned, the context I was in, the particular department, the particular program, was so bad, was so terrible, that I was looking for any way out. So I'm going to come back to that point in just 1 second. But, years ago, I'm now divorced, but years ago I remember sitting with my wife and we were watching a news item, a television news item. And it was about a controversy at a university where one student beat up another student. And because it was recorded on camera, like someone had a cell phone and uploaded it to the internet, there was then this question of if the student would be expelled or go to prison or both. And, it was in general a news item reflecting on how, these kinds of cameras have changed the game, have changed the ethics and politics of these kinds of issues. And I think some people were looking at this and questioning, well, in the past, didn't university students just kind of beat each other up and forget about it? Did it always have these kinds of terrible consequences of kicking people out of university and what have you? But remember, I looked at it. I was sitting there watching the piece with my wife. And, from the video, you really did get a sense of the personality of the guy who assaulted this other person who started this fist fight and so on. And I remember I said to her, they're asking the wrong questions. 30 years ago, that guy would have never gone to university. And it was a university in Canada. I said, a guy like that 30 years ago, you can see his whole attitude in this fight. He doesn't have an interest in academic study. You just think about it. He has no desire to become an academic. This is not someone who aspires to this. He's obviously someone who's been cornered into going to university because he feels he needs it to get a job. And, not in a perfect world, in the very imperfect world we had a few decades ago, somebody like that would have had all kinds of opportunities outside of university that didn't require a BA, that didn't require an MA, and he wouldn't have had to fit himself into this context that he's uncomfortable with. End of anecdote. The truth is that I myself, even though many professors praised me as brilliant, I've had professors say to me at length that they believed I was a genius, like sit down with me and talk to me like this is something they've got to explain to me for my own good. I've had professors, not just sometimes praise my work and sometimes praise my character and talk to me about my future, take the time out of their day to try to advise me on my future career. I appreciate all that. But the bottom line is, my experience at the university, on both occasions, on both universities, actually I can make this video longer, talk about the third university I was involved in, but we're leaving that out. We're going to pretend there were only 2 universities involved here, was so terrible, was so uniformly, unforgivably negative, that on both occasions, I was applying for jobs outside of the university, including like literally working in a coal mine. One of them was a gold mine. I was applying for all kinds of blue-collar jobs, the type of jobs my grandparents actually did, and also more broadly that were commonly available in my grandparents' generation. And I can say to you honestly, if just one of those jobs had come through for me, I would have dropped out of university to pursue that job. Something else I'm on the record for that I've already discussed in the channel, while I was at University of Victoria, I applied to join the Canadian military. I went through the whole testing process, and it's a funny story if you tell it in a funny way, right? And I can tell you again, if the Canadian military were as well organized as the U.S. military, because they're very well organized at recruitment, at getting you from the recruiter's office to basic training in 24 hours, they're very proud of that. I would have shipped out to Afghanistan rather than stay in that university program. It was that bad. So even for someone like me, someone who identifies as a bookish intellectual, someone who studied so many languages, someone who's so passionate about history and politics, if I had had any alternative, I would have dropped out of university because the quality of education available to me was absolutely abysmally terrible. And I'm going to wrap up this video now for the sake of it. If you think that someone with my interests in ethics, philosophy, ecology, politics, if you think those interests are rewarded in a Canadian university context, you may be watching this in Russia, you may be watching this in Germany, you may be watching this right here in China, where I now live. I know it may be hard for you to relate to, but no, my interests were not rewarded at all. I really found myself again and again in university contexts where just the fact that I existed was an unwanted challenge to the whole system, no matter how polite I was about it. When I was involved in Buddhist studies, the fact that I would talk about slavery within Buddhist studies was an unwanted challenge to the whole system. Within Asian studies, the fact that I would talk about politics in the way that I do, and you see it on this channel, doesn't matter what, was an unwanted challenge to the whole system. There are departments of Asian studies that tell you straight up all they talk about is poetry, literature, movies, and they don't want to admit that politics even exists. So it's completely absurd. If you watch this channel, you may think my interests are mainstream, but actually my experience subjectively and personally has been that again and again, I've been an unwanted challenge to the institution I was a part of. And if there had been any alternative, if I could have worked in the coal mine, if I could have signed up and gone to Afghanistan, as bleak and terrible, I'm not talking about a dream job, as terrible as those options were, all those jobs I applied for, and I mean, while I was at University of Toronto, I applied to become a paramedic. There's so many jobs. I mean, while I was at UVic, I probably applied for 100 different jobs, including internships as well as jobs. While I was at University of Toronto, I don't even want to count, but including, when I was at University of Toronto, I applied to just become a waiter. Like I applied to become a security guard. I applied to become a security guard, and it's not even worth describing. I applied for really low-level jobs, and I applied to enter a trade school to become a bricklayer. I did the application. Okay? If any of that had been possible for me, if any of that had worked out for me, I would have dropped out of university, because that's how terrible the quality of education was for me, despite the fact that I am, as many of my university professors flattered me, I am a naturally gifted writer. Researching and writing essays is very easy for me, and in many ways I'm intellectually inclined. So that's what it's like growing up in Canada in the 21st century. And for any of y'all watching this who can relate, my heart goes out to you, because there are tons of people going through the same struggle.